Hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Ryu. I'm the CEO of Aararat Consulting. Welcome to our third installment of our video series, The 5 Best Ways to Lose a Customer and Best Practices for Keeping Your Customers. If you've seen the first two installments, you'll know that our first video said, don't be available. And in our second installment, we said, be distracted. Well, the third best way to lose customers is miscommunicate. Now that might seem pretty obvious, and most people think they're great communicators, but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the time that you're going to lose a customer you could have kept, it's because of miscommunication. You see, when you've got a customer communicating with your frontline personnel or communicating with your customer service representatives, the customer typically knows exactly what it is they need to communicate. In other words, the customer will succinctly tell your frontline person or your CSR exactly why it is they're communicating with you. It's when our people are not good communicators that instead of solving the problem and keeping the customer, we make the problem worse and we push the customer away. At Aararat Consulting, when we do training, this is the definition we use for communication. We say communication is to understand and be understood. In other words, communication is bilateral. Once again, if you've got a customer that has a concern, they usually know exactly why it is, what it is, and why it is that they're calling you. Because typically speaking, in our society, people don't like to complain. They find it uncomfortable. It's psychologically awkward. Also, if we have a complaint and if we voice the complaint only to find out that our complaint is not valid, we tend to feel very embarrassed, even ashamed of ourselves. So we don't like to expose ourselves to a situation where we're going to feel embarrassed or ashamed. When I was talking to a telecommunications company, I had a problem with their service only to find out that I had the problem and the company didn't. However, the customer service representative, he was very gracious. We actually hit it off really well. We almost became buddies when we were on the phone. And he helped me not to feel awkward. Okay. Remember that when a customer calls you, that it takes a certain amount of courage for them to make that call. If they're going to make that call, they have probably rehearsed in their mind exactly what they're going to say. In other words, your customer will communicate well. If communication is to understand and be understood, if it's bilateral, then the whole process falls apart when your people don't communicate back. In other words, the customer will articulate exactly what it is they have a problem with, and if your people aren't listening carefully, they will misunderstand what the customer said. When your people misunderstand, then they start to respond based on a misunderstanding. Your customer now is only going to get frustrated. Your customer will repeat themselves succinctly, because remember, the customer knows exactly why they're calling. The customers probably rehearsed this in their head, or even rehearsed it with their friend or their spouse. We don't complain quickly, but when we do, we're prepared. So when the customer articulates succinctly what their problem is, and your people don't pay attention, they listen with half an ear. They only try to get the gist of it. And then based on their misunderstanding, because they weren't paying attention, they now start to communicate back to your customer erroneously. Your customer is going to get frustrated. Now, if you want to see a really good example of this, and it's really kind of funny, go to Google and Google Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And Google the scene where there's a king and his son, and the son is getting married. And it's the king and the two guards scene. The king and the two guards scene. And that's where you're going to see a classic comedy example of lack of communication, understand and be understood, not with the king and the guards. Anyway, getting back to real life. Most conflict is based on misunderstanding. And most misunderstanding is based on miscommunication. I'm going to give you a really good example. Think back to being a child. Think to being invited to somebody's birthday party. All the kids are sitting around in a circle and they play something called the telephone game. Now, if you haven't played it, I can explain to you very quickly how it works. In the telephone game, you pick one child, usually it's the birthday child, and the birthday child starts the game off, and the birthday child is going to whisper into the ear of the person on his or her right. And they're going to whisper something. They get to say it twice. Here's an example. Sally went to the circus and saw 7 elephants, several monkeys, and a dancing bear. Now the little kid to the right of the birthday girl is going to say, what? And the birthday girl gets to repeat it. Sally went to the circus and saw 7 elephants, several monkeys, and a dancing bear. That's all the birthday girl gets to do. Now the person on her right has to whisper this into the ear of the person on their right. They only get 2 shots at it. Anyway, it goes around in a circle. What comes back, what the last person says, might sound something like this. In the constellation Sirius, there's a supernova, and it's had several black holes found by NASA. That doesn't sound anything like what the birthday girl said. That's how miscommunication occurs, because we don't really listen very carefully. In this game, if everybody listened carefully, you wouldn't have to repeat it even the second time. It would just go around in a circle. It would come back exactly the way the first person, the birthday girl, spoke it into the right ear of the first person in the circle. The trouble is, and studies have shown this, we don't listen. Our minds are not totally focused. Our minds listen to the first few words, and then our minds, which can race way faster than people can speak, our minds will fill in the gaps. And once our minds fill in the gaps, we stop listening altogether because we assume that we know what they're going to say. Well, that's called being omniscient, all-knowing, and none of us are. And yet, that's the way almost all of us act. At Aararat Consulting, we have some excellent communication exercise we do. And before we take on a client that's got a larger company, if we're going to be training their workforce, if we're training their management team, we insist that before we train the large group of people, that we train the senior executives in communication. And every single time, the executives say, well, I don't think we need any training in communication. And we always say, if you can't set a good role model for communication, you can't expect your people to improve their communication. So we just want to do a couple of easy exercises, and guess what? If you pass them with flying colors, great, then we'll move on to your workforce. Except every time we do these simple little exercises, the management comes back and says, wow, we could use some help with communication. One of the best examples is I was doing a presentation, and a woman that I was presenting to, and she was, late 40s, she actually got really offended, and she said, I don't have to put up with this. Well, someone went to talk to her, and she came back in, and she sat there with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. See, she was communicating with me. She was communicating that she wasn't happy, that she had to go through what she thought were kindergarten exercises in something as elementary as to how to communicate, because in her mind, she was an excellent communicator. Now, during the course of the exercise, she didn't do very well, and I purposely was gracious. I didn't point any fingers at her. Just like the telecommunications customer service rep was gracious with me when I made a mistake based on what I thought was the company's error. So I was gracious to her. And we did the exercise, and I just kind of called on other people. What was very interesting was 2 days later, I got a very long handwritten letter from her, and she was very, very apologetic. And in the letter, she said that she was offended. She admitted that she felt insulted. And by the end of the letter, she explained, I've never learned so much in 45 minutes, especially learned so much about something I thought I was really good at. In other words, we can all use a little bit of instruction on improving our communication, because miscommunication leads to misunderstandings. Misunderstandings leads to disappointment, it leads to confusion, it leads to frustration, and it leads to interpersonal conflict. And that's how we lose customers. So if you don't want to lose customers, you need to get everybody in your company, and especially everybody who's on your front line, and everyone who has direct contact with your customers, and everybody who's involved in customer service, which is pretty much everybody. Everybody needs to get training in communication, because all of us could use training in communication. The alternative is just keep miscommunicating and keep having misunderstandings and keep losing your customers. Because again, and this bears repeating, when a customer contacts your company, they have already rehearsed in their mind several times what they feel the problem is, because none of us like to complain, because all of us find it uncomfortable or awkward, and none of us want to be embarrassed or find out that we made such a blunder that we feel ashamed of ourselves for even bringing it up. That's why you hear in training programs that have to do with human dynamics and soft skills, that's why you hear people say, I don't like conflict, because it makes us feel uncomfortable. Provide your people the type of training that they need in communication so they can feel confident. Because when they can answer a customer's questions confidently, sometimes the customer will be wrong, and the customer will accept what your people are saying purposely with confidence. And even if your company has some form of responsibility in the problem, you need to teach your people how to properly hear what the customer has to say, so that your people can accept responsibility and then agree with the customer and then move forward to fix the problem. Because studies show that when somebody contacts you to complain about something, if you don't fix it, they're going to repeat that story a minimum of 19 times. 19 people will hear something bad about your company. But studies have also shown that when somebody, a customer, is complaining to one of your customer service representatives, or one of the people on your complaint desk, or somebody on your online chat line, or anybody who's on your front line, if a customer complains to this person from your company and your people take responsibility for your error and then fix it, studies show that your customer will boast to so many people about how well you looked after them. So what would you rather have? Here's neutral. Do you want to have 19 stories told against your company, or do you want to have 19 stories told about how awesome you dealt with something? Very few companies take responsibility. The difference is huge, but it requires good communication skills. So one of the 5 top reasons that people lose customers is miscommunication.